Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning from Washington. What I want to talk about is transition from narrow to general intelligence and why that's important. Let's see if I can get these to go properly. Yes, okay. It's important to understand that there are three kinds of artificial intelligence. People talk a great deal about various versions of machine learning and so forth, and it really kind of there's so much detail that sometimes people get confused. It's useful to think of today, we have narrow intelligence. It's still machine learning. It's all the things that people talk about, but it drives a car or it diagnoses cancer. The one that diagnoses cancer cannot drive a car. That's narrow. That's going on, and that's a big deal. But you can predict unemployment with this when you talk about narrow intelligence for driving a truck. You can sort of linearly forecast out, prepare for it, and so forth. But that's not so with the next one. General intelligence is more sometimes referred to as human level. It's not really human in the sense, it's obviously machine. But like us, it can address a novel problem. It can draw on the Internet of Things worldwide. It can draw on other narrow intelligences. It can make up telephone calls. And it's like you call up experts. You want to find out some answer to something. It can do Google searches. It can do all kinds of stuff. It can be innovative in a strategy like we are innovative. The third one is called artificial superintelligence. And that is the issue. Superintelligence emerges, most likely, from general intelligence, except that it sets its own goals beyond human understanding and without our awareness. So things start to happen and we don't know why. Now, the reason this is a big issue, the only way we can determine if artificial superintelligence turns out in a good way for us is the transition from narrow to general. Because if we don't get the initial conditions right for general, then how it super evolves from that, we have no control over. The only control we have is how general gets started. And people will tell you, some, that well, general intelligence is so far off in the future, we may never even have it. And some people say, well, we could have it in 10 years. So it's a wide range of possibilities here. Now, as your friendly neighborhood futurists, we're supposed to look at a range of possibilities. One of the possibilities is 10 years. It may take 10 years to put together international agreements on initial conditions, enforcement systems, and all that. So that means we have to start now. Okay. The increasing power and universality of artificial intelligence can worsen the economic conditions we already have. Concentration of wealth will be increased by artificial intelligence. Same with income caps widening. Same with employmentless economic growth seems to be the new norm. Return on investment is obviously better, usually better on capital and technology than on labor. Future technologies can replace much of human labor. Long-term structural unemployment looks like the basic forecast. So what do we do about this? So the Millennium Project studied everybody else's stuff, 30 to 50 studies on this stuff. And we found out what questions weren't asked or answered badly. And then we did a Delphi to address those. Then that produced 3 global scenario drafts. We sent out the drafts separately in different Delphis to be reviewed and improved. And then we gave these scenarios to nodes around the world to do national workshops. The idea is you read the scenarios, you throw them in the trash, and then you have a workshop. What do we do about this? Then we collected actions from around the world, distilled them down to 93 actions, and then we divided those into 5 separate Delphis. So Osmo, there was 9 Delphis done in this study. I think that's a record. And then, so what you end up with is 93 actions individually assessed as to likelihood and impact and comments on all of that, all distilled down to a page per action. So that's 93 pages of detailed stuff distilled from around the world. As far as I know, no one's even gotten close to this kind of analysis on it. Because when someone says, well, we'll solve the problem by just improving science and technology, mathematics, engineering, education. All right. In the year 2050, how many people will be making a living like that? All of them? I don't think so. So we got to come up with some alternatives. These are some of the actions that we put together. These are the top 5 ones for education. And in Finland, I see as one of the leaders in this, pushing the creativity more than the memorization, the self-actualization more than the robot behaviors and so forth. So you're doing fine. We even have it rated this way. You can see in the report later on. So this is the report that Osmo's talking to. It can be downloaded for the whopping price of $25 or something like that. It's really good. And the scenarios in there are rich. They're real scenarios. They're not just endpoint discussions of something, but they're real scenarios. It's got a lot of rich detail in all 3 scenarios. So technological unemployment is predictable, as I mentioned, but not so with general. But what do we do about all of this sort of stuff? Didn't every new age create more jobs and replace? You hear this all the time. It says, don't worry about it. We've always done fine. Well, what's different this time? One, the acceleration of technological change is much faster now than the transition from the agricultural age to the industrial age and from the industrial age to the information age. This one's much faster. And you also have globalization, interaction, and synergies among new technologies. We call it NT, because I don't want to just list a whole bunch of technologies. Just like we say ICT or IT for information, we'll do NT for new technologies. The existence of a global platform. When I was involved in getting packet switching, that was backbone for internet around the world, I had to get in a jet plane. It took a while to get things done. But now we already have internet. So it's a global platform for instantaneous sharing. We didn't have that before. Standardization of databases and protocols. We're collaborating as never before in scientific research, which speeds everything up. Few plateaus. In other words, like the laptop I'm using at this moment is similar to the one I used 25 years ago. Yes, it's more powerful. Yes, maybe it's more aesthetically attractive, but it's got a little keyboard, it's got a little screen. So I got used to the idea of traveling around with a laptop. When you have artificial intelligence going into general and rapidly changing and changing and changing and changing and changing, you don't get a chance to adjust. Imagine you have to upgrade your software and the procedures every day, drive you nuts. Well, unfortunately, we're looking in that direction. Billions of empowered people in relatively democratic free markets able to initiate. Well, that means that change is creating grassroots up much faster as well. They have the capability to do that. 7, machines can learn what you do and then do it better. That was not the case in those previous transitions. So those are 7 reasons why it's not the same. So if somebody says, well, everybody will work it out. Well, maybe we will, but we're not going to do it automatically. We may have to go to a self-actualizing economy and guaranteed income like Osmo was talking about. So we may end up being okay, but it's not a guarantee. So these are the things that the narrow intelligence is already doing better than we are already. That's quite a list. That's a lot of unemployment, just that alone. And we haven't hit the big time yet. Also, what we think is possible will have to change, not only because of Moore's law, but also Nelson's law, which is the bandwidth, how much stuff you can get through there. Plus artificial intelligence accelerating to artificial general intelligence, plus computational science, which means that you can do a scientific research globally through internet on grid computing, very fast matches and does your scientific matching so fast that you can do a lot of scientific breakthroughs that you couldn't do before by a lab. Think of the normal scientific process: observation, hypothesis, experiment, analysis, publication, and then wait for 6 months before the next journal article comes out. With computational science, you can do thousands of experiments simultaneously. And by the way, at no cost, because you can have other people volunteer their unused computer time. So we can create supercomputers sort of on the fly. And the synergies among all the new technologies. So these 4 together will change what we think is possible, or should. Now, so what's happening is that we're slowly duplicating life in the sense that we have created an autonomic nervous system that runs our basic systems, food, digestion, all that stuff. We'll do the same thing with artificial intelligence. So just like the body automates most of our stuff so that we can use our brain up here to be creative, society will do the same thing. We'll free up the imagination, free up the mind. because we'll have the basic stuff taken care of by artificial intelligence. Societies are getting too complex to run if we don't have artificial intelligence, the whole system. So imagine the whole large system, all interconnected for an eco-smart, not just smart cities, but eco-smart cities. Interconnected just like the human body is. Imagine if your body only had half your nerves connected to half your muscles. You would not be able to walk down the street. Well, that's where we are at this moment. We got to get it all together, and that's where we're going. Now, artificial general intelligence, as I mentioned, takes into account all those other things and then is creative at the same time, like we are. Superintelligence sets its own goals, and we don't know how long it's going to take to go from from general intelligence to super. We don't know how long that will take. Some people say it might happen almost immediately. Some people say it may never happen. But as futurists, we have to look at the possibilities. So I'm going to assume that as a possible future is that superintelligence emerges from general intelligence faster than we think is possible, i.e. within a year or more or less. So that means we got to really look at that transition from narrow to general. If we don't get the initial conditions right for that transition to general, then all the science fiction stories you've seen are plausible. Not necessarily going to happen, but they become plausible this way. So we want to create a governance system. The Millennium Project is now proposing to work on that. We're in the process now of trying to get the funding. We think that this is our next major study. We hope that we'll get some support for that. I'm going a little fast because I know our time is shorter here. There's a bunch of different governance models, and you can look at this later on. But one of the obvious things is imagine the world today without the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm willing to bet we would have had several dirty bombs in major cities of the world already. We have a governance system on nuclear material, and it was created during the Cold War. So just because we have an arms race between the United States and China and Russia and organized crime and so forth, that doesn't mean we can't create some sort of system. We've done this before. We can do it again. We even had arms control agreements during the Cold War. So we're going to have to figure out what model will work. Humanity needs to think together about how to govern the transition from artificial narrow to general. Why the whole world? Because if the European Union does everything right, if Russia does everything right, if China does everything right, but if little Dominica in the Caribbean says, hey, organized crime, come on down, buy the best talent you can buy, and we'll create general intelligence right down here, and we'll put it in the deep web, and no one will know what's going on, and we can bribe countries and do all that sort of stuff. Do you think that organized crime has thought about this? Probably. Organized crime, remember, makes twice as much money per year collectively as all the military's annual budgets collectively. So it's a big deal. So we have to figure out how to create a global system through a global participatory system somehow, including some of the bad guys somehow, or we're going to have to take into account how to do that. So that's all I got to say. I hope I made it within the time zone there.
Okay, you didn't speak about this basic income issue.
Ah, yes. Okay, because I didn't mention the scenarios.
Of course,
okay, yes,
what I like to hear from you.
Yes, okay. One of the things, as Circa is my witness, I asked a member of the Finnish parliament when they're supposed to respond to some studies on UBI to get a cash flow statement. One of the things, a cash flow projection to show financial sustainability, because it's no good if you just do it on a short-term basis and and you run out of money. We have to figure out, we have to create alternative cash flow projections. Now, it seems to me that it makes sense to do experiments all over the world right now, and some of them are beginning to be done, so that we learn what works, what doesn't work, and to prove to people, which we already have in some of the studies, not our studies, other studies, have shown that if you pay people, most people do not become lazy. Most people actually put the money to good use. School fees, other sorts of activities, starting small businesses and so forth. Most people do not want to spend their life being bored. They want to do something that's interesting. And a lot of times we don't do something interesting because, well, the proposal wasn't accepted. The boss didn't agree with it, etc. But if you have guaranteed income, you have the freedom to begin to create. Now you can make more money because guaranteed income is not that much. It's just a basic thing to make sure you're not thrown out. The moral part here also is we have a social agreement saying if you go to school, you do well, you get a job, you do well, then you retire and everything is cool. Well, but what happens with no fault of your own? 15 years from now, you're thrown out of work. And a lot of your skills are no longer relevant because artificial general intelligence is beginning to move around the world. Well, do we want to have a society that throws people in the streets? I don't think so. So I think we have to now begin to think about how we make it work. My guess is that we should start to, and when I did a little work on the guaranteed income cash flow projections in the United States, and it looked like we couldn't make it work until about 2030. Why? Or 2035, I think. There's two curves you got to take into account on this. One is as the new technologies come online, they will be new sources of income to be taxed. So that's a new source of stuff, taxing robots, all the things you've heard about. That's a new source of income. Now, the other part of the equation is what does it cost to have basic living? Well, the cost of basic living is still going up, but it will start to go down because, like, consider medical diagnosis. You come up with a good software to do the diagnosis, you don't have to recreate it the next person. So the next person's use is almost nothing. So we'll get to a point where a lot of the services that people will need will become extremely low cost or almost free. So that means you'll see a curve going up cost of living and then starting to cross over and then come back down. So as the cost of living goes down, what you have to pay people can go down and the new sources of income starts to go up. We got to study that model, how to make it financially sustainable. Otherwise, I think we can't win the argument, Osmo. I think we have to have the cash flow projections to show here's how it's financially sustainable under different alternative futures. We can prepare, as I said before, about narrow intelligence unemployment because it's a linear projection. It's in one category. You can get ready for that. You can be warned ahead of time, like the truck drivers, but not general. That's too broad. So, and I think it may be necessary. Otherwise, you have a society of high unemployment worldwide, and the migration is, from poor to rich areas will be a horrible mess. So with that, Osmo will tell us how the horrible mess will be